Today, we will be joined by Samar Verma, Program Officer at Ford Foundation. Welcome to Conversations of Change, Samar. We are honored to have you with us. For the audience, I will quickly tell them a bit about Samar. Samar is currently the Program Officer at Ford Foundation India. Prior to this, he was a Senior Program Specialist at International Development Research Center of Canada. He began his career as an economist in the corporate sector, working with a textile company. Samar holds a PhD in economics and an MBA. We are honored to have you with us, Samar. Thank you so much for joining us at Conversations of Change. Uh, I would jump at it and quickly ask you my first question, which is, Samar, we are still getting out of the pandemic in India. 2020 saw the world change in many ways. How do we work? What are the issues we are going to focus on? Now, talking about the impact sector specifically, what do you think has changed? And what are the new changes that are expected from a perspective of program design and funding?
Well, first of all, Satyam, thank you very much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to have these kind of conversations because in addition to sharing what we know a little bit, these are also opportunities to learn from, from people like yourself, because these are extremely relevant questions and not that we know all the answers of. But let me straight away begin by trying to respond to an extremely important, if I may say, a very broad-based question that you've asked. And let me begin by saying that, quite often we end up talking about COVID-19 as the harbinger of all changes that are happening in the sector. I want to come back and kind of reflect on what I see as the reality of many changes that we are seeing in the sector has actually been happening for a long period of time. If you look at the reasons why this sector exists, if you look at the inequalities around us, they've been there for a long time. What COVID-19 has done, it's like the low tide in the seas. When the tide is high on the seas, you're not able to see the rugged economic topography. But when the tide goes down, as it happened during COVID-19, what was suddenly visible was something which was already there, but now it's suddenly become exposed. And we are all watching, so whether it's about migrants returning home, whether it's about middle and upper income groups suddenly realizing the importance of domestic workers and their contribution to, to their own well-being and life. All of these things, I think, have been, so it's more the exposure to the reality than the reality itself. A lot of these things have been happening for a long time. In terms of big picture changes, I mean, there are many ways in which one can look at it, Satyam. Let me just say a few things. Number one, I think what is now more apparent than ever is, do we know what we need to know in this sector? Now, that may appear as a trivial question, but actually, when I started working on philanthropy at Ford, and even before that, I realized that a lot of data that is available in this sector, and not a lot is available, but whatever little is available is either anecdotal or it's very, very, related to a few sectors or few areas or few regions, etc. It's not being done on a regular systematic basis. So the first thing that needs to happen, therefore, and is a critical part is the creation of data and evidence for the entire sector. Something that, as Ford in philanthropy portfolio, we are committed to. The second change I think that has happened is impact investing, which has been, it's been in the news and in the development sector for a long time. I think there is some change in the way impact investing is evaluating its own self and its own contribution. And what is that change? The change is impact investing is now beginning to value social returns alongside profit. And that's a big change because that affects a lot of the new donors, particularly from the corporate sector, the high net worth individuals who are all coming into this sector in a very big way. That's very positive. The third change is we are seeing more collaborations and unconventional partnerships. And both of them I particularly highlight because it's not just about newer ways of coming together. It's also about newer actors coming together. Whether you look at the corporate sector, the investing community, the civil society organizations, public agencies, suddenly there's a greater demand and a greater felt need and a greater willingness to come together. That's and let me just say probably two other big things. One is rise in what we call as patient capital. So suddenly donors are now beginning to realize something which has always been there, but not perhaps as urgently visible as is the case now post pandemic. We need to build institutions if we want civil society sector to grow and to contribute the way they have done, for instance, during the pandemic and otherwise. And finally, the increased role that technology is beginning to play, both in the operations of civil society organizations, but also in their effectiveness, in their engagement with the wider constituency. So these are some big changes that I see happening, Satyam.
No, thank you so much, Samar. I mean, that's as you said, it's a. I think the changes that are happening are also happening at a very, very systems level, and like some of these are what we call like a landscape changes that we have gone through. Sometimes I think we need to also see how these changes sustain long term, like from a positivity perspective, right? Because it seems like a lot of things were happening in a fairly reactionary manner or a drastic manner. Sometimes when you talk to these corporate professionals, they will talk about their corporate earning and say, let's rule out the coming financial year. Let's start thinking about growth from the next financial year. I think similarly for our sector, we need to start thinking about what kind of foundation we can build this year that will support us in the next years to come, like from a resilient perspective, from sustainability perspective, and from an impact perspective. That comes to my second question, Sama, which is we all know that a sustainable recovery from the efforts of the pandemic will not be possible without the civil society organization. We saw a big role civil society has played during the pandemic. Uh, uh, and we also saw the biggest challenges the sector is facing when it comes to some of the regulatory environment. But to what extent can civil society continue playing that role, not just when the crisis has hit, but in the future? Or how can we make civil society as a prominent actor in the policy discourse or the political discourse of this country?
Yeah. So Satyam, the good part of the news is that the role and the contribution of civil society organizations during the pandemic has become suddenly far more visible than had been in the past. Its role, in fact, has been acknowledged by the highest political and executive leadership in this country, which I think is phenomenal. Um, that opens up new doors of opportunity. That opens up new avenues for collaborations. That opens up new methods through which resources can be raised. And I'm not just talking about financial resources. I'm also talking about attracting talented human beings, human resources into the sector. So these are some of the important opportunities that have opened up. We know that social stock exchange, for instance, is proposed to be set up. Now that in some ways is a major opportunity. It may come as a disruptor, but hey, many of the changes and positive changes have come about because of disruptive forces. And it opens up newer opportunities for organizations to not only raise funds, but also to build up their own capacities, and for newer types of organizations to come in to build up capacities for organizations to participate in social stock exchanges more meaningfully. So some of these things I think are very important. It will help improve credibility of civil society organizations. It will help improve accountability and legitimacy, and eventually the perception of civil society organizations. So all of this, I think, is very, very positive. The challenge, however, is given that the fragility of civil society organizations has been exposed more than ever in the past during the pandemic. A quarter of civil society organizations will probably not have survived by now, or at best will survive for maybe 3 to 6 months. We know that from some surveys that have been done. But most of these civil society organizations, in any case, do not have adequate capital and assets to be able to survive for longer than a year. Now, that is not sustainability. clearly there is something that needs to be done to make sure that civil society organizations are not only effective in what they do, but they are also stable and sustainable, because the sustainability has an impact on the stability of their contribution, but also has an impact on attracting good quality talent. And that is critical. Eventually the work that civil society delivers is through people. And therefore it's important to have good quality people in this sector. So I think, I just absolutely don't think that civil society organizations' contribution in any case is going to reduce or decline in any way. If anything, it's only going to become more prominent. There are opportunities for it to improve its own functioning, but also improve the perception in the eyes of the larger stakeholder group. And the challenge is, how do you get it done in an environment where funding keeps it, moving from one cliff to another cliff? Can we find ways in which this fragility can be addressed in a very sustainable, long-term institutional way? And this is where, Satyam, if you allow me to say that, in Ford Foundation, in the philanthropic work, this is exactly what we are trying to do. We are trying to, remind the Indian philanthropic community of the rich legacy of institution building that family foundations, corporate family foundations in this country has provided in the past. We need to just remind ourselves of that rich legacy of building institutions and start doing it all over again.
No, thank you so much, Samar, for specifically the closing remarks on this question. And this legacy we have in this country, sometimes we don't think about it, which is like, the Tatas of the world. And I mean, there are numerous examples of that, and how philanthropy has been in the DNA of people in this country. It's just we don't use that word. We might just use some other word to define it, or probably treat it for granted rather than thinking of it as like something else you are doing for society. Samar, you talked about funding. I want to come. I want to specifically focus on what do you think how the funding would change in light of the pandemic? I mean, are there further changes that are needed in the philanthropic sector to make deeper, better, more sustained impact?
Yeah, so the good news, Satyam, is that if you look at the way funders responded to the pandemic, whether
Right.
moved by the images of migrants showing up on television, or moved by the calamitous impact pandemic had on 70-80% of India's population, informal workers, informally employed workers, vulnerable communities, whatever may be the motivation. The fact is that funding in size and nature has taken a sudden leap in this country in the last year. Whether it's individual funding from high net worth individuals, whether it's use of technology for crowdsourcing of funding, whether it's family foundations who suddenly became more responsive to the needs of civil society organizations. That, I think, has been a phenomenal positive development. Um, Now, the question is, to what extent will this sustain over a period of time? I believe and I hope that this is not an aberration, and that this change in the nature of funding that has happened in the last year or so continues to grow in the direction of becoming more stable and becoming more patient. At Ford, for instance, what are we doing to make sure that this change becomes a little bit more permanent? So, give you a few examples. We have ensured that at the time that funding began to dry up in many ways, we innovated and we actually went and raised more funding through social bonds. And we raised $1 billion using social bonds. So $1 billion worth of money was made available to our partners and other organizations at a time that funding was going down. So that's one way in which we responded. And of course, there are many other ways by introducing more flexibilities in our approach, whether it's about flexibility of reporting, whether it's about flexibility of reallocating existing resources, whatever be the flexibilities, whatever grantees came back to us and spoke to us and shared with us, our partners, we responded in all possible ways to make sure that we are not only making more funds available, we are also allowing greater flexibility and longer term commitment as opposed to very short term commitment. At our end, I'm very happy to say that in 2015, for instance, the long term commitment in our entire funding portfolio was just about a quarter of the total funding, so about 25%. Today, it has gone up to more than 80%. And it's been a conscious choice, and we intend to continue it that way. So we want to set an example, and we want to demonstrate and persuade and motivate through the things that we are doing. And as I said, these are some of the things that we have done. We have also catalyzed some of the funding through pledges where other foundations and other international organizations, funding organizations have joined hands to make a similar pledge. They make more funds available, they make it more flexible, they make it longer term. We did, in fact, you might recall, also do a similar thing in India with Idalje Foundation, with the Nilikanis Foundation, Azim Premji, I don't know, many other organizations we had. So, these are ways in which we are responding. And I'm pretty confident that, through our effort and through the effort of like-minded champions in the funding community, and there are quite a few, I can tell you, in Indian philanthropy, we are very hopeful. And as I said, I'm quite confident that we will be able to sustain most of these changes in the right direction of impacting social justice through philanthropic portfolio.
So it's incredible to hear, Samar, that how the long-term funding commitment has gone more than 80% compared to how it being 25%. And I think that's exactly what the sector needs, not just at this point of time, but like to think long-term. Because as you also said earlier, if you are running a organization and you know that your visibility of surviving is only less than 12 months, not sure how much focus can be on your real program and work. Probably, I mean, I don't remember the data at the top of my head, but a lot of surveys in the past have talked about how founders or the leadership team, majority of the time is being spent on fundraising, which is probably not the ideal utilization. No one can say that you can stop that entirely, but I think it's a balancing act what we are looking at. Samar, you also talked about collaborations and partnerships, and we saw a lot of collaborations and partnerships emerging during the COVID era. Some of my own personal mentors said, let's wait and watch. Let's see how this goes over the period of time. And I know since you have worked on collaborative platforms a lot in your career, not just at Ford, even in the past. So wanted to hear your views on what are the importance of these collaborations. And is Ford looking at organizations collaborating in a more strategic manner going forward from a sustainability lens too?
Yeah, I mean, that's an extremely important question, Satyam. Let me tell you personally, when I was when I started my career in the corporate sector, one of the things that always amazed me is how a lot of work we did, which was in terms of building new knowledge, was not even regarded as good quality research by research think tanks. They would just not engage with the corporate research, thinking it was low quality, perhaps even irrelevant. When I moved to research sector, I realized that they don't talk to industry bodies because they think industry bodies don't have the capability to do research. From there, I moved to advocacy organizations, development sector, and I realized that they don't talk to research think tanks and the private sector. So what was happening is, we were all working in silos. None of us were taking a full systems view, as a result of which our impact was far less than what it could have been had we all come together. And I have been personally inspired through my own experience of moving from one sector to another. And it's been my personal goal as well to try and see how we can bring about all the different actors who all are looking at the same puzzle, the same situation from very different perspectives. The classic example, I think, today of why collaborations and how collaborations are important is development of vaccine for COVID-19. Up until this vaccine for COVID-19, which has been developed in a record time of less than 12 months. We know vaccine development would take decades. And yet it's through collaborations across geographies, across regions, across disciplines, across private and public sector agencies, across, with the private sector also coming on board. Just look at what we have been able to achieve. It's a remarkable feat in the history of mankind, frankly. Humankind has tremendously benefited from something like this. And to me, this is a classic case of why collaboration is essential and what kind of results we can achieve as humankind if we are working in collaborative spaces. Now, since you also spoke about what is it that we are doing at Ford on collaborations, I can tell you that collaboration is not something new at Ford. We had realized the importance of collaboration and we had encouraged this not only among funders, but also among partners that we work with in a long time. For instance, our contribution to green revolution in this country, which we are very proud of, in a very humble manner, but very proud of, was a collaboration across regions. It was a collaboration across multiple disciplines. And it was a collaboration between the private sector and the government agencies. We work with government programs to try and develop what is actually needed, not only in terms of policy changes, but also in terms of actual seeds and the kind of irrigation facilities required for all the green revolution that eventually happened. So we've been doing it in the past. Currently, we have, for instance, very specifically speaking, in our grant making procedures, we have questions where we as program officers have to reflect upon and contribute to our program review documents on how are we promoting collaboration, what percentage of the contribution is Ford making as opposed to others, how are other partners being brought on board, how much of convening is happening. These are part of reflections that we do on all grant making. So, this is something which is kind of the DNA of Ford, and we want to promote it all the time.
Great. No, good to hear that, Samar, and very happy to see that how you are also accountable to talk about these things at like an individual level, and the organization takes it very very seriously. And key thing, it's collaboration on every spectrum. The funders need to collaborate, the people working at the ground level need to collaborate, and like you talked about, the academia and the industry need to collaborate. Because this idea that we are better than the other, or this one is not as good as we are, doesn't lead to any kind of long-term positive result, because we have to look at society and systems as a whole, and everyone has a role to play. The moment you start bringing that philosophy in, a lot of magic starts happening. Coming to technology, I think you and I would be sitting in person and doing this in a cafeteria with like someone with a video camera and a person with a mic and everything. The technology has been a boom in a certain manner, taught us a lot, kept us connected. For a lot of not-for-profits, they managed to reach their beneficiaries. Sometimes I think like one of the surveys I was personally involved with, the annual status of education report, one of the largest volunteer-led movement happened using telephone this time, the power of technology. I'm not saying, that technology will replace human interaction, but the question is technology is clearly enabling and bringing in efficiency and access in a faster manner than it would happen otherwise. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on how do you see technology and what do you think we should keep looking at when it comes to technology, because clearly has been a silver lining in some manner for us in the sector.
Yeah. No, you are absolutely right, Satyam. I completely agree with you. Technology has indeed been a boon, particularly all of last year. We suddenly realized that how they helped us stay connected as human beings. It was not ideal, but it at least enabled it in a very very big way. And in that sense, I think it's been a boon. To me, what technology has done is, there are many ways in which one could look at it. But let me just talk about in a particular way in which I understand technology. So the first thing that technology has done is brought about a change in mindset. More than anything else, That's where change begins, as we know. And what technology has done is created a greater acceptance of new ways of working, increased willingness to collaborate, and collaborate with unconventional partners. So, in addition to the fact that we are able to connect with each other, I think the change in mindset and the increased willingness, therefore, to now reach out to larger audience who you would otherwise find it difficult, even logistically, but more mentally, I think is now breaking down. So that's one positive development which I attribute to technology. Second is, I think a lot of organizational focus is now undergoing a change. Um, Organizations have realized that it's great to be effective. It's wonderful to achieve results. It's wonderful to have those annual reports that capture all those impacts that you're having. But at the end of the day, you cannot remain vulnerable as an organization yourself. You have to have things like business continuity plans, and more and more organizations I see are now talking this language of strategic leadership, which respects and values creation of or evolution of these kind of things like business continuity plans, etc. And I think this is again something which technology has enabled. The third thing I think which technology has enabled in a very big way is just opened up a completely new, let's say, diversity of communication channels and communication strategies which are now available to us. So suddenly, we are beginning to realize that communication is not a linear process, nor is it a process that directly links the output to a particular type of audience. So it's a fairly advanced way of thinking about a communication plan where you are looking at all the different types of outputs, whether it's a 160 or whatever 180 character Twitter to 180 page report, and who are the audience and how you match all that. I think technology has enabled it, but technology has also opened up the possibility to think of communication in a very, very new way. And combine that with young people who bring in all kinds of software skills and the new apps that have come in, most of which is free. It's amazing what technology has brought in terms of just the communication. And finally, I think the resource mobilization strategy is also undergoing a change because of all the technology that is now available to us. I mean, crowdsourcing of technology-enabled crowdsourcing of fund is not something that was even conceivable, frankly, 4 or 5 years ago. It's something which is now begun to become almost a commonplace idea. People just are beginning to take it for granted, which I think are all positive developments. So telling the story of change and addressing organizational fragility and moving it into a resilient, more sustainable organization, as you were saying, Satyam, I think are all factors where technology has played an extremely important role. Let me stop here.
No, thank you so much, Samar. I mean, while you were talking about it, I realized yes how we take crowdfunding as a normal thing now. I mean, you would not see anyone not doing it, and if people are not doing it, how everyone advocates for it, and how you see like catalyzing larger base of people who are willing to donate small amount of money for the cause they believe in, and using the power of community. I mean, sometimes you know how in the past we would have someone coming to your door asking for donation. That's what crowdfunding has done with using technology, where someone is not coming to your door but probably hitting your inbox, which works at your house right now. During the pandemic era, a lot more. I know we have limited time, Summer, and unfortunately, we will not be able to discuss everything we want to discuss next time. Probably I should have series which is part A and part B. But I do want to ask my favorite question, which is, how when we talk about young professionals and when we talk about people looking to work in the sector, what is that one piece of advice you would like to give it to them? Knowing very well that it has been very disruptive when it comes to education and employment in the last 12 months. It has been extremely stressful for people who have been in the system working to sustain their jobs. And it has been extremely stressful for anyone who is looking for opportunities and career in this sector, and they are very committed. How would you, what is that one piece of advice you would like to give someone based on your experience of decades in this sector?
Well, first of all, I would heartily invite them to come and join this sector because we need that vigor, the energy, the passion, and of course, the disruption that new ideas bring in. And typically, it's the young people who bring in. So, first of all, with open arms, I would very much want to welcome them and encourage them to join. Having said that, I would also tell them, based on my experience, if I may say two things. One is learning today and going forward will be a lifelong journey. It will not be a destination. It's not a milestone. And they should not feel afraid of learning. On the contrary, in my view, they should always seek out new learning. They should always be curious to learn anything new, whether in their own area of expertise or something outside. The skills of being a generalist are going to be in great demand. And the adaptability to move from one skill set to another skill set, I think, are critical issues and will be part of all the learning that needs to happen as people grow in this sector. So that's one thing. And second, I would say that it's important to remember that humility is an important part of education. That's something which I've learned in my own experience as well, Satyam. It's important to understand that no matter what situation we are in, we have to understand that we are at best a very small contributor to the change. There are many other factors, including chance, because of which change happens. If we begin to recognize and internalize this fact, a lot of humility will come in on its own. And humility also is a critical attribute of building relationships and building collaborations. I have seen it as something which is critical ingredient when you are wanting to work in teams or you're trying to delegate work or multitask. All of these things, I think, are important. So these are the two things I would say to the young people that they should keep in mind when they join this sector. And I would very much invite them to come join this sector and make the difference in the lives of so many people in many, many ways that now, particularly technology is enabling us.